What's up, everybody? Welcome to Coast, Florida.
Yeah.
When you threw Coast to Coast in there, Mo, I had to think of Space Coast, Coast to Coast. Guys, sorry, this is the Moving to Florida show. I am Judson. He is Mohit, and we are Florida Realtors here, coming to talk to you about the differences in the different coasts of Florida. Right. We got East Coast and West Coast in Florida. I think anywhere else in the country, you talk about the West Coast, you're thinking about California, right? You're thinking about Oregon, but we have a West Coast here in Florida too, right on the Gulf. So let's talk about it.
Let's do it. So East Coast and West Coast. Obviously, the East Coast is the Atlantic and the West Coast is the Gulf, right? It's that simple.
Yeah. So, all right, podcast done. So we do have, there's definitely differences in the coasts. And, of course, as you guys know, Florida, a big majority of Florida is a big peninsula. Right. So the peninsula that sticks down heads north to south, and you can drive coast to coast in a couple of hours in some parts, I'm sure. I don't know if there's any road that really heads straight, east to west across. It's always going to be kind of, I think most of the roads, I'm thinking about like I-4. Right. I-4 runs southwest, northeast from Tampa up to Daytona area. That stretch probably take you close to 3 hours, I guess.
More or less, depending on traffic on I-4. And then once you get to the West Coast, you're going to get on 75. I guess that's the West Coast major highway is 75, I-75. And if you go to the East Coast, it's I-95. So I know a lot of people from the East Coast of the state of the country use I-95 to come down. So that's what they're familiar with, is the East Coast of Florida. And people who from the Midwest, they usually use I-75 to come down to Florida. And they'll usually end up in the West Coast of Florida. So.
Right. Well, and I think there's a kind of another coast. It's kind of the same, but when we talk about Gulf Coast, we've also got the Panhandle, which is a little bit similar, but a little bit different from the beaches and stuff of the other Gulf Coast of the East Coast, or I'm sorry, of the West Coast of Florida. A little bit different. So let's get into that. To me, one, I think, distinctive difference between, if we're talking about the Gulf Coast and the East Coast is the sand. You definitely get a different sand. On the different coasts. On the Atlantic side, on the East Coast, you get the more of the thicker, heavier sand.
The brownish, greenish sand.
Right. A little bit darker. It gets hotter.
It does.
On the Gulf Coast, you get more of the sugar sand, especially up in the Panhandle. That's where you really get the really lightweight, kind of fluffy sugar sand. And I think we were up in Destin earlier this year. We had a little trip up there, and we we've gotten so used to going out down here, and we're like walking out. You wear your flip flops until you get to your spot, and then you pull them off and like run down to the beach because the sand's hot. And we're like, wait a second, the sand's not hot. Like it just that sugar sand does not retain the heat.
It doesn't.
Like the sands on the East Coast do.
Yeah. I think it's easier to maneuver in the West Coast on that sand. Like when you're walking and stuff, I feel like I'm always sinking over over in the East Coast. Especially when we go to Daytona and stuff like that. So, well, as you know, Daytona used to be a destination for spring breakers. So whenever spring breakers came down here, they would go straight to the East Coast and go straight to Daytona and party it up there. Now I believe it's flipped. Everyone goes to the West Coast.
To the Gulf?
To the Gulf area.
Well, they go to the Panhandle a lot.
Yeah, they go to the Panhandle. Again, it's the white sandy beaches.
Yeah. Well, one thing about Daytona, again, we're back to the East Coast. Over in Daytona, one of the few places you can drive on the beach. Yeah. So there are areas of Daytona Beach that you can drive on the beach. Usually you have to pay like a daily admission. It's not too bad, $10 or $15, I think.
Not terrible.
But you can actually drive down on the beach. Now, I mean, you can't drive all the way down to the water, but I mean, kind of handy, instead of having to park in a parking lot and cart all of your stuff out, you just drive right out on the beach, you park, and you can pull, your ice chest or your canopy or whatever just right out of your car and have everything right there.
Yeah, agreed. Now, I'm not much into fishing. I know you're into fishing a little bit.
I've been fishing before.
So what would you say most fishermen go to? They go to the Gulf or they go to the Atlantic to go fishing?
I think it probably depends on where they're located and what kind of fishing you're doing. I know one of the most popular spots that I hear a lot about fishing is the inlets. Yeah. So, oh man, it's escaping me now. I want to say Ponce Inlet, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah.
Is one of the ones on the East Coast. And an inlet is, I mean, just what it sounds like. It's a place where water can go in or out. So you've got the intercoastal, which is basically a big waterway, but behind the barrier island, and then the barrier island, and then it's ocean. Well, this is an area where the water goes in and out. So as the tides change, the water could be going one way or the other. But because you have like this combination of fresh water and salt water, you actually get a lot of activity and a lot of wildlife around that area. So I've been fishing there before. My pastor at my church is actually a big fisherman. He loves fishing.
Yeah.
And I had been curious about fishing at the inlet, and so I went with him. And it was pretty cool. I mean, we're out there on the pier fishing. You know, we caught a few different things. We were trying to catch snook at the time. Snook were in season. And we didn't catch much. We were fishing with we stopped at a bait shop and got some shrimp and stuff like that. But they were out of live bait. But he had a cast net and a school of these little I don't know what they were, some sort of bait fish swam by, like a whole school of them, and he saw them and grabbed his net, and he's like running down the pier with one of those. I don't know I can't think of what it's called. We didn't look up our terms, but like the big net that you throw out, and
it's a catching net.
he threw that out. Yeah, and it lands on him, and he only ended up pulling up a couple of these bait fish, but we put one on, and it was actually an over slot snook. So slot is like you can only keep them between, I don't know what it is, but let's say it's 32 and 42 inches. Right. If they're smaller than that, you got to throw them back. If they're bigger, you got to throw them back. Mine was like 45 inches. It was a big snook.
Oh, wow.
So he had caught one smaller than slot earlier, and then I caught one over. Okay. So we did have to throw it back, but it was pretty cool experience. That's supposedly a really good fish to eat.
Yeah.
But yeah, the inlets are where I see people fishing a lot. I think deep sea is more of a Gulf thing, maybe. Though I think maybe that may be a misnomer because you don't really have super deep water in the Gulf, at least by deep ocean comparison. But I have been deep sea fishing once in the Gulf, though. That was when we lived in Louisiana, and we went out of South Louisiana, which was a cool experience too. Yeah. Ended up hooking sharks and several different kinds of tuna, which was delicious.
I'm sure.
But back to the coast.
Back to the coast. Now, it all depends on anyone who's planning on moving to Florida and wants to move to the coast. I mean, it all depends on the vibe you want, right? So if you're coming from like New York and you're used to the hustle, bustle, the fast-paced life, and you still want to go to the beach and read a book, I would say Miami would probably be your best place, the East Coast. Now, you still get the metropolitan lifestyle, the big shops, the restaurants, all that good stuff. But at the same time, you can go down to the beach and just chill out too. So I know a lot of New Yorkers love Miami because it's very similar as far as a major metropolitan city to that. And then I would say Tampa would be a very close number two. Clearwater, Tampa. If you're into like the sports vibe, Tampa and the Clearwater area is phenomenal. You have the Bucks playing there. You have the Lightnings out there. Tampa Bay Rays are out there.
It's baseball.
It's baseball,
right?
Yeah. So I mean, you get all three facets of professional sports out there. So if you're a big sporting fan and you want to move to the coast, I would say like the Clearwater, Tampa area would probably be the best for you. Now, I know a lot of folks like that calm, peaceful, chill vibe. I would personally recommend being down there, like a Sarasota area. That area is pretty nice too. Naples. I know Ian just went by there. We just talked about it last week about Ian. But I mean, all those areas will get recovered within the next 6 to 8 months real quick. So if you're still planning on moving down there, I'm sure the property values have tanked a little bit over there because of the hurricane. But if you want like a very, chilled out vibe and, not too much craziness going on, I'd say Naples would probably be really, really cool. Sanibel Island, those type of areas that are in the west, I would say West Coast, and they're very chill. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the West Coast, but there's some East Coast stuff that are really, really cool too. Daytona Beach has always been very popular with everybody, and there's a lot of gift shops, and it's a very touristy vibe out there.
Daytona, I think Daytona though is one of the most affordable beach towns.
Right, agreed.
In Florida, really anywhere in Florida, from what I've seen. I think Vero Beach could be another one. I'm not as familiar with Vero Beach, but a more affordable, especially if you don't want to be like right on the beach. If you're good being 15 minutes from the beach, you can get a home in Vero. I know a couple of years ago, under 300,000, well under 300,000. I don't know exactly what that's looking like today, but definitely a more affordable market. I do want to go real quick back to just because we did mention Hurricane Ian and Sanibel Island. Sanibel Island Causeway was the big bridge that was taken out by Ian. I just saw an article earlier today that they actually have the causeway reopened.
Oh, fantastic.
I don't know if it's permanently repaired, but maybe it's kind of like that Pine Island Bridge where they've gotten it
temporarily
where vehicular traffic can get through. So they've got the safety and rescue crews going in, the electrical crews and all of that can actually get into Sanibel Island now. So that was great news to hear.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's pretty quick how they got those bridges up there.
Amazing,
yeah, that's amazing.
Right?
I mean, within 48 to 48 hours, they were up and running, and you got the emergency crews coming back and forth. At least they can get there and whatnot. I mean, I know you can only do so much on a helicopter. So again, I'm glad those bridges are back open so people can at least get to some kind of safe ground.
Yeah. I got another one for our coast. So Gulf Coast, and this would be both the Panhandle and the West Coast versus the East Coast. One thing that really stuck out to me, again, I'm from Louisiana originally. When we went to the beach, it was always Gulf Shores. I actually had family that lived in Bay Minette, Alabama. Right. They were about an hour from Gulf Shores. So like growing up, if I went to the beach, it was Gulf Shores. And I remember the first time I went to the Atlantic was probably about 10 years before actually moving to Florida, somewhere in there. So we're talking, actually, no, it would have been 2008. I think it would have been 2008 was the first time I actually probably saw the Atlantic. And I remember thinking how deep the beach looked. In other words, like how I'm like, you walk over the sand dune and it's still like 100 yards before you get to the water. At least we were up in Jacksonville at that time. And it was crazy to me how much like sand you had to cross before you got to the water, because I was used to these shallower beaches, so that's a big difference to me. It still sticks out to me a lot of times, and it definitely varies from beach to beach, but in a lot of places, if you're on the Gulf, you go out on the beach, you're not dragging that ice chest too terribly far before you plop it down. But on a lot of the Atlantic beaches, man, you got a haul to get out to where you're actually going to plop down and sit down.
Very true. Speaking of experiences on the beach, when I first moved to Florida, my parents wanted to go to Daytona. Just, spend a week there, check it out, check out the vibe over there. Not knowing it was bike week.
Oh yeah.
So we go out there, we have a couple of friends that own a couple of motels and stuff out there. So we gave them a little buzz that, hey, we're coming through. We should be there in a couple hours. They're like, are you serious? We're like, yeah.
Are you on the chopper?
Yeah, exactly. Are you guys coming for bike week? No, we're not coming for bike week. What is that? We never knew there was this thing called bike week here until you move here. And then literally we got there and it was at least 300,000 to 400,000 bikes on the road. Man, it was absolutely.
We're talking Harleys here, folks, by the way. Bike week is motorcycles.
Yeah, Harleys, antique bicycles, bikes, and it was just craziness. And I was maybe 15, 16 years old. I mean, these guys with cut off sleeves, a sleeve's worth of tattoo. I'm like, man, where did I land? Oh, man. And one of the while we were driving around, one of the guys, because you can see the hotels and motels right while driving, and one of the guys had his motorcycle and he was revving it inside his room with his door open. I'm like, this is some kind of craziness that's going on. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend. I mean, if you don't have a bike and you're not into that whole bike scene, bike week wouldn't be a smart idea to go to Daytona. But it was really, really cool to see that. I mean, like, so many different bikes. You got to be very careful while driving because you're probably one of 3 cars that are out there during that time.
Right? Yeah. One of the few that didn't know better.
that didn't know better, exactly. But yeah, it was a cool vibe, though. That was our first time there. And then, obviously, we go to the Space Coast. Space Coast is Melbourne, Satellite Beach, that whole area there. I think that is a very chilled out area too, like the Melbourne Beach area. Not too many people go there. I mean, it's still East Coast beach, so you get that dark brown sand and whatnot. But it is really nice and very peaceful out there.
Yeah, that is something else that you don't get on the West Coast that you do on the East Coast is the Space Coast. So you get shuttle launches
exactly.
over there. Man, they are pretty regular. I mean, it seems like 2-3 times a week these days.
Yeah. I'm always looking and it's like, we launched this satellite or we launched that or launched this. I mean, we have not only NASA there, you got SpaceX there now. I think Virgin Space Airways is out there now.
ULA, United Launch Alliance.
Yeah, and a lot of these engines. Go ahead.
Well, we came out a couple of days ago. My son wanted to go see, the Halloween decorations have started popping up in the neighborhood. Yep. So we went out for a walk after dinner to go see it. And we stepped out the front door and looked. And by the way, it's been a full moon recently. Yeah. So we're just coming off of a full moon. But it was a full moon and it was just on the horizon. And we looked, and when we stepped outside, there was a rocket launch. We had no idea, but we could still see the rocket going up. So you could see the kind of smoke trail, which gets kind of a little wiggly.
Yep.
And then you could see where it separated, and then you could still see it looks like a bottle rocket off in the distance going up. And we're in Claremont. I'm in Claremont, so that's west of Orlando. But we can see that from here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we could still see it going up, and the full moon, and it was just that perfect sunset. Sun was setting, and so it was almost it was orange and purple. Man, it was such a cool view. I tried to get some photos for our Facebook page, but man, it just didn't
I would
do
say
it
that
justice.
would probably be one of the big highlights of living in the Central Florida area, especially in the Orlando area, is you get to see these launches from far. I mean, you're not that close, but at the same time, you
don't have to deal with the traffic.
You don't have to deal with the traffic. You don't have to deal with all the craziness that goes on whenever there is a launch. But you get to see it from where we live, which is really, really, really cool. If you're into that stuff, but I mean, even if you're not into it, it's pretty neat to look at something like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, it was so cool to just step out the front door. We were going to look at Halloween decorations and we're like, here's this just beautiful scene of a rocket launch and the full moon and everything. It was so cool. Yeah. And I have seen some videos about it. So, look that up, guys, if you want to check it out. I've seen some videos of people that were closer to it. And I saw a video of you can see the rocket sitting on the pad and going up, and it actually transits the moon. It went in front of the moon from that view, which was pretty cool.
Oh, that's neat. That is really neat.
Yeah. Now they didn't have the purple and orange kind of sunset vibe that we had going on, but
And you can feel the sonic booms when they do come back here. Sometimes if you're paying attention,
I don't think I've ever felt one of those.
If you're paying attention, you'll feel the sonic booms, especially the big ones. I think we just
mistake them for the Disney. I think we just mistake them for the Disney fireworks.
We hear that every night. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's probably the same thing with the rocket launches. It depends on the way the winds are blowing and probably the environmental factors, because sometimes we can't hear them at all, but if I step out in my backyard, I can see them. And other times I'm inside, I'll be outside and I can see them, but no sound. Yeah. Other times I'm inside, in my office here with the door closed, and I'm like, house is rattling. Not literally, but you can hear that boom. Yeah. You can hear that echo in the distance.
Sonic boom. The sonic boom. Yep. Yeah. That is a really, really cool thing too. Anything else you want to add from the coast side? I know, we didn't talk much about the southwest side, which would be Fort Myers and Naples and stuff. But there's more out there. There's Jupiter out there as well.
Well, I know one thing. We mentioned the Barrier Islands.
Yeah, the Barrier Islands.
Pretty much all down the East Coast, you have a Barrier Island, and then for a lot of it, you have the Indian Atlantic River or the Banana River. Yeah. So there's points from Orlando, if you're driving over to Cocoa Beach. You're going and you go up on a bridge, you cross the Banana River, big body of water, and then you're on land for a minute, and then you cross the Indian Atlantic River, which is the intercoastal. Yeah. And so you cross two big bridges before you actually get to the beach. On some parts of the Gulf Coast, you have a barrier island, but there are, I believe, parts of the Gulf Coast where you straight to the beach. Now so kind of like Tampa. Right. Would be not an example of that. You've got the bay, so you go to Tampa, then you cross over the bay, which is a pretty big crossing.
It is,
and then you're in like Clearwater, St. Pete, and that's when you get to the beach. But I believe down around Naples, you've got kind of a similar thing to that, but you've got basically a big landmass there. Yeah. So it's not like you have on the East Coast. What you really have is a pretty skinny strip of land, and that's what we refer to as that Barrier Island. whereas on the Gulf Coast, you've got more of the big chunks of land there to get to the beach.
Yeah. Also, I think the Gulf Coast is also known as the Florida's cultural coast as well. Just read that somewhere.
Yeah. Well, Mo, if we go way back to when we first started recording this show, we talked about the different coasts of Florida. Do you recall that?
I do. That was like our earlier shows, like way about 2 years ago.
Right, and we did have some different people on from different parts of the different coasts, and maybe that's something we need to revisit because it's been, a couple of years at this point.
Yeah.
But maybe that's something that we need to revisit and come back to and talk about all the different coasts.
Yeah, and try to get some more people out there and give us an update.
Here, I just had to pull a list back up. But you've got the Space Coast, which we mentioned, the Treasure Coast, which is down there around Vero. I know we had Brian on to talk about the Treasure Coast before. The Gold Coast, of course, you got the Florida Keys, which we haven't really talked about today. Yeah. You've got the Sun Coast, the apparently Cultural Coast. I think that's what you just mentioned in Sarasota, and the Nature Coast, which is one we don't talk about as much. We had trouble finding somebody to come on and talk about the Nature Coast, actually.
Yeah.
And then even you got the Emerald Coast, which we had Vicky on talking about the Emerald Coast up in the Panhandle. Yep. And we can't forget about the Forgotten Coast.
Yeah, the Forgotten Coast.
I had to look that up again because I forgot, but it refers largely to a largely untouched and uninhabited area of coastline in the Panhandle. So just off of the Emerald Coast, they have a bunch of military bases in that area, I believe.
True. Yeah, bro. I mean, what would you recommend if someone from, let's say, New York wanted to move down here and they wanted to be in a coast? So where would you say, what would you say is your favorite part of Florida?
I think there's one important thing that we haven't talked about, and that is, what kind of waves do you like?
Yeah.
Do you like bigger waves, or do you like the more calm and gentle waves? Because the Gulf is going to have the smaller, more gentle waves. So definitely, if you got small children, like when our son was small, we like taking him to that because the waves were not as intimidating for him. It was easier for him to get in the water and play and stuff. But if you want bigger waves, more action, and more tide changing and moving, then maybe the East Coast is the place to go. And especially if you want to surf. You can surf on the East Coast of Florida. It depends on the area. But if you want to surf, definitely the East Coast. So I think that's a big factor too, is what kind of wave sizes do you like?
Exactly. I think, you're absolutely right. The Gulf Coast is more of a calmer, more flat, whereas, Atlantic Coast has larger swells and waves that are a mile high.
Yep. Well, and I think this is an important consideration too, and something that we both like about Central Florida is we can go to either one. Now, we're not 10 or 15 minutes from the beach, right, but in an hour to an hour and a half, we can be on either coast.
True.
So we have literally been like, hey, we're going to have a beach day. We're going to go to Cocoa Beach, and we check the weather app, and we're like, oh, it's thunderstorm and pouring all day over there. We headed the other direction and went to Clearwater, and it's a beautiful sunny day. You can't do that if you live in Cocoa Beach, because then it's going to be 3 hours to get to the other coast.
Exactly.
But that's an advantage of living here is, what kind of vibe do we want for our beach day? And what's the weather doing, and then we decide where we want to go.
I would say normally East Coast, even if you're talking about water temperatures, if you plan on going into the water anyways, the East Coast usually stays pretty consistent with like 70 degrees, 80 degrees in the summer, 70 degrees in the winter. Whereas the West Coast, it could get down to like 50 degrees in the water, whereas it could be as high as 90. So it also depends on the temperature drops that you get on both sides. So if you like, cooler waters and stuff, I would say, then the West Coast would be your best spot.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good point too.
Yeah, man.
I think we're here in October now. Yeah. I think beach days are over for the year. What do you think?
I wouldn't say completely over. It could still be 85 degrees on Christmas Day, and we could still hit the beach.
Fair.
I don't know if you want to.
Especially for you guys that are from up north, you guys can handle the cold water. I can't handle the cold water. If the water's under 75 degrees, I'm not getting in.
I mean,
but so for me, the beach days are over. But here's another thing. Again, going back to Central Florida, or for the South Floridians, of course, it stays more temperate there. It's warmer, so you have more beach days if you live in South Florida. Or for us here in Central Florida, we just got to drive a little bit further.
Yeah.
Maybe drive 3 hours down to Fort Lauderdale or something like that. You can still have a beach day. I know we had a beach day in February a couple of years ago. Down in Fort Lauderdale, we went down there, had a condo, and it was beautiful.
Yeah,
and it was cool coming out of winter too, to be like, all right, beach day in February.
Yeah, I know, right? It's who up in the Northeast, in the North Midwest, or where can say, "Hey, I'm going to the beach in February." No one. You got to come down to Florida to go to the beach in February.
I don't know, man. Those guys are crazy. I've been to Disney resorts in December, and those Canadians are in the water. They're in the pools, man. They can handle it. Those guys are built different.
They are built
what
different.
It is.
They are built different. They say 50 degrees? Man, that's summer weather for us.
Right. Yep.
All right, man. Anything else you want to add on the coasts? I'm sure we're going to try to get some more people on here on the coasts, and they can talk to more about it.
Yeah, I think that's it. We need to revisit our coasts. Maybe for you guys that are newer listeners, go back and check out our Florida Coast episode from way back in the early days. And you know what? Maybe we'll pull it back up and republish that as a bonus episode for you guys. And I want to get back to maybe trying to find some folks to come on the show and talk about those different coasts, because there were a few of them, like the Forgotten Coast, that we never hit up. So we'll go back to those forgotten coasts and hit that episode up again. Other than that, man, I think this has been a great show. It was fun. Let's wrap it up here. If you guys have any questions, though, of course, Mo's going to tell you how to reach us.
All right, we want to hear from you. You can reach us on our Moving to Florida show hotline by dropping a voicemail or texting us to 407-900-5859, or drop us a DM on Facebook or Instagram at Moving to Florida Show. And for Twitter, our handle is at Moving to FL Show. If you'd like to connect with us, if you have any questions, or if you need a realtor here in Florida, you can reach us at movingtofloridashow@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show if you like our content, so it'll automatically download to your device and get you one step closer to moving to Florida.